All right.
There we
Please
go.
welcome Tihi Hayslett.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, the Long Beach Community Theater. Love y'all, love being able to share my stories. I'll hop right into it. So, growing up as like a brown kid with indigenous ancestry in Iowa in Tornado Alley, I was not allowed to be afraid of thunderstorms. I remember being really little when my mom sat me down for the first time and told me the real story of thunderstorms and tornadoes. And it goes like this. When thunder and lightning were just little boys, no bigger than me at around 5, they were the best friends. They spent every day together. They did everything together. Everyone swore they were related, but they weren't. They were just friends. They would play out in the fields and just really had a great time with each other. But then, like everyone, they grow older, right? And they become adults and they get married and they have kids and they have to settle down and they have responsibilities and they didn't get a chance to see each other that often. But every once in a while in the summer, when everyone was, either asleep or, doing chores, when things had just like calmed down a little bit and they could have a little bit of free time to themselves, their families would let them go. And they would, as full grown adults, run out into the field and scream for their best friends. And they would say, hello, hello, I'm here. Thunder would scream out, hello, I'm here. And lightning would reply back, I'm here too. And oh my God. And they'd hug each other, they'd run around, they'd play like they were little kids. And everybody here on the ground, all the humans, would get really afraid because they didn't know. They thought what they were witnessing was really violent, but what they didn't know was that they were witnessing long-time, lifelong best friends reconnecting and reuniting after so many years. So I grew up as the kind of kid who, whenever we saw the tornado warnings, the thunderstorm warnings, we'd get really excited. I would get super excited when the siren would go off, that seek shelter siren that means it's time to run and hide. I would put my swim trunks on and I would run outside into the field and I would wave at the wall cloud and the funnel clouds and the lightning and the thunder and I would say, hello, hello, I'm here. I did this the whole time growing up. Even still as an adult, I have to resist the urge to run outside during thunderstorms. But what happens when you grow up this way, and particularly when you grow up in a place like Iowa that's prone to thunderstorms, is you develop this thing called storm fatigue. Most people think storm fatigue is just when you ignore or stop paying attention to warning signs, but it's actually much deeper than that. Storm fatigue is it's the inability to recognize warning signs for warning signs. And this, storm fatigue is specifically about thunderstorms, but I experienced this in other areas of my life, specifically the first relationship I was in. I was in a relationship with this guy who became abusive, and there were warning signs, but I just didn't know how to see those. So my partner, my ex at the time, or my partner at the time, my ex, he was abusive. He had some mental illnesses as well that he was diagnosed for, and there was always the day that he turned, which was Wednesday. And I used to hate Wednesday. It didn't matter what I did on Wednesday. I was getting hit or I was getting the shit beat out of me or something even worse. Um, and it didn't matter. I could be perfect. I could be not perfect. It would always come. And eventually I realized that this was like not a good situation. I needed to try to get out. And that's when I encountered the first, not the first, but the most major, the most profound kind of injustice ever, which was as a gay man trying to seek resources for domestic violence. This was back in 2006. And at that time, because there were not any sort of marriage protections or domestic partnerships or anything like that, it was still very much legal in about 36 states to deny housing and other services to LGBT people. And when we talk about housing discrimination, we're talking about whether or not you can get a bed in a domestic violence shelter when you're afraid for your life. So I went to 3 different domestic violence shelters in my town, and all 3 of them turned me away specifically because I was gay. Abusers are also really good at taking your family away from you and taking your friends and everyone, sort of shrinking your life down and making sure you don't have a support system. So this was a major sort of injustice. I needed help and I didn't have anywhere to go. We were in Florida, which is prone to other kinds of severe weather, including hurricanes, which also cause thunderstorms and tornadoes. And we were in Orlando when Hurricane Katrina happened. A lot of people don't remember that Hurricane Katrina passed over Florida before it went up to New Orleans and devastated everything. So it passed through Central Florida. It passed through on a Wednesday. And I board up the apartment with my boyfriend, and I'm sitting there. I'm nervous. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that he's going to turn. And I can't remember what it was specifically that I did, but he turned, and before I knew it, he was breaking a ceramic plate over my head, and I started bleeding. Um, and something changed in the air, and I did what I'd never had done before. Usually I would cry and I would run into the bathroom and I would try to lock the door, and he would burst his way through there because he was much bigger than I was. But this time I stopped. I didn't say anything. I stared at him. I went to the refrigerator. I grabbed a 12-pack of bottles of beer and I went towards the front door. And he tried to stop me and he said, "What are you doing? You're crazy. It's a hurricane outside. It's storming outside. You're going to go outside." And I said, "Yes, I'm going to go outside because I know the real story about thunderstorms." And so I walked out of my own apartment into a hurricane where I felt safer. And I found a park bench and I sat down, a picnic table in our apartment complex. I sat down and I started drinking these beers just by myself, getting drenched in the middle of Hurricane Katrina. And at the end of every bottle, I would picture that empty bottle and fill it with all the times in my life that I felt weak. Every single time on the schoolyard that someone called me a faggot, or any time I was ever called the N word and I didn't know how to respond, or all the times that my dad used to scream and hit me as well. And I filled every one of these bottles with all of those memories, and then I chucked it at the wall, the outdoor wall of the apartment complex, and I watched the glass just shatter. And I realized in this moment I was doing a ritual of sorts. I had to destroy a part of myself before my abusive boyfriend could destroy all of myself. I had to let go of all of those weak moments and try to hope that there was something there stronger than that. Because at the time I felt so disenfranchised, I felt so powerless that the powerlessness was the thing that needed to die, or else I was going to die. And when it was over, when I had finished these 12 beers, I went back inside my apartment and with my boyfriend there, and I took my licks, and he got rough with me. He threw me onto the bed. He ripped my clothes off, which was much easier to do because they were soaking wet. Um, and I stared up at the ceiling, and I pictured that I was up there in the thunderstorm, and that I was miles away from what he was doing to my body. And when I was up there, I saw thunder and I saw lightning, and I cried out to them and I said, "Hello, thunder, and hello, lightning. Hello, I'm here. I'm here too. And I'm not a little boy anymore either." And after about a year of solid attempts after that of trying to escape, it took a year, but I was finally able to. And I did it not with the help of any city government or any services or even any family or friends, but I was able to do it on my own. Thank you.
Oh, God. You gutted me that night. You gut me now listening to your story. Your story, it's just amazing what people go through that you have no idea. You have no idea what's behind a person's eyes and their face. and who you meet in life. You know, I meet you as a strong, you know, I think of you as like a funny storyteller. You know, I met you through this forum, and you just don't know. You don't know what it is to walk in someone else's shoes. And
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you went through that, Tihi. I would never guess you've been through all that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was 14 years ago too, which is really interesting. Um, that I feel like oftentimes we hear these stories, especially around domestic violence, that are just focused on the violence, and we don't think about what happens afterwards or the life afterwards. And that became the thing when I left and escaped that relationship, that I kept trying to reach for. It's like, what do I do now? Like, what do I do now? I don't have a template for it. Um, but yeah, I'm like, it took some years, and I realized, and with the time and distance, like one of the things that I think about all the time is that you're gonna have a life beyond trauma, and that life could be full, and it could be filled with adventures and laughter and, you know, fun times and good memories. And you have to believe that things are gonna get better.
Yeah. It seems sometimes like we have multiple lives within one life. Because I've been through some things too, and sometimes I look back at those things and almost feels like a movie, like it happened to someone else, but I know that it happened to me, and sometimes I have to accept that it happened to me, and I know that those things shape who I am and give me depth of
Mhm.
understanding and compassion for others. I know that.
Yeah, yeah. It's really, yeah, it really is important. And it's interesting how it shapes your life and how it shaped my life. Like, I'm really, really happy that I've had positive, intimate relationships since then.
Uh,
I used to be so worried that I wasn't able to do
yeah.
that. Um, and like, yeah, I've gotten to that point where I've proven to myself that, like, he didn't ruin me for everyone else.
Yeah, he didn't break you. He didn't break
Yeah,
you.
yeah, even though he certainly tried, but he didn't do it. Thank goodness.
Definitely. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing another piece of yourself, and you're very intriguing to know, and just so interesting, and so many layers to who you are. The life that you've lived is, you could write a book. I mean, you've been through a lot and lived a lot of places. You're a traveler.
Yeah, yeah. It's I spent 17 years of my life in Iowa and honestly didn't like it and didn't like the idea of being in one place for that long. So
Yeah,
I like to pick up and move every couple of years just to there's and I guess this doesn't have to do with domestic violence at all, but just Iowa, like growing up there, so many people had never left the state, never
mm,
intended to leave the state, and were like very content with spending their whole life and dying pretty much in the same 4 county radius of where they were
yeah.
born. And I was like, that's never going to be me.
Yeah, you don't even seem like you're from Iowa.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
been a long time.
because I met you after you've come here from New York. So I think
Mhm.
of you as a New Yorker. So when you tell me Iowa, I'm like, like it's hard for me to imagine you in Iowa. You're such a big personality for Iowa. Big, real
Yeah,
big personality people there.
I definitely didn't think I fit. It's interesting because like as a queer person, like, and I have a lot of other friends in the queer community, and like when I first started to hear people talk about their experience as a transgender person always feeling like they're in the wrong body, like the way I could relate was that I always felt like I was born in the wrong place.
Mm,
And I would like look around and I'm like, this is not for me. This is not where I'm meant to be. So I need to move and I need to change. And so like that was like my early sort of like, understanding of transgender. And I was like, it's just like me, except for with gender.
yeah, yeah. I grew up in the National Park Service. So, and I have a huge love for nature. I always get pulled back to nature. But I knew the minute I could, I was going to the city, which I moved to LA. You know, I was like out to a city, and I've stayed. And this is home. Long Beach is home for me. So
I love Long Beach so much.
So I know you were in Mexico City when we actually did the show, which I was telling you earlier that I'm glad we actually are re-recording, because our recording was a little off with you being so far away. So I'm glad we have a clear recording. And you had talked about perhaps moving there. So I'm wondering, are you going to be living in Long Beach and Mexico City? Are we having dual, or are you actually you're out of Long? Are you leaving us? That's what I want to know, Tihi. I just met you. I don't want you to leave yet. Are you leaving us?
If I can swing it, I would love to split my time between Mexico and Long Beach. So that's the thing that I'm trying to think about, is like how to make that work, because I don't want to pay rent in two different places.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Once I figure out that secret, though, I'm telling everyone.
Yes, I would like a place in Mexico as well. So please, please do. So, Tihi, I'd like to just pull you back to the night that we did the show on injustice, and just get a couple of your thoughts on. One is, you've shared with the Long Beach Community Theater at the Speakeasy a few times now, once at the actual bar at D Piazzas, and then a few times on our Zoom meet since we've been in the quarantine. For this particular topic, it was much different than what we normally do. It definitely held a lot more weight. I was very particular about who I asked to be in this show, and I asked each person that was in it. I think one person asked me to be in it. Everyone else I went to and asked. So I'm curious, just like how you were decided to participate, how it was for you to participate, and then also if you can just give me some feedback and speak into what it was like for you to hear the talk back from the community after you were finished sharing such an intimate and vulnerable story.
Oh yeah, I was really nervous. So like I've had like a pretty long career in political activism, so I was like, I know that there's lots of different things about injustice that
Mm.
I could talk about that aren't as personal and don't hit me home in the same way. But all of that activism really stemmed from this experience of trying to find resources, of reaching out for help when I knew that I was in over my head, and being turned away for something so insignificant as being gay, right? And it's so unfair, and it's so mentally debilitating. Um, and so I knew that, like, if I was to do the theme justice, I would have to tell that story, and I'd have to find a way to tell that story. And I remember you asked me, and I was like, I have a story, but it's a little traumatic. Let me think about it.
Yeah.
And I like wrote down some notes. I had tried to tell this story once in New York when I was doing my own storytelling night, and I didn't think that I hit the right sort of notes. But like I knew that I wanted to play around with this idea of the duality of thunderstorms and storm fatigue, and what that means for somebody who's in a domestic violence situation. Um, and so I was like, let me flush it out. Let me flush it out. I rehearsed it like 7 times. I cried a lot. Uh, but then felt like it was good. And so I like texted you back, and I was like, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. I do really like to, I rely on humor a lot. But like actually in my fiction writing, it tends to be very like emotional. So I was actually kind of excited to share this story, and especially with the community of people that have grown, especially in the quarantine, on these Zoom events, which I love. So I knew it would be sort of like fun and surprising. I was like really hopeful that like people would get something positive out of a story that's so negative. And that's what the reaction was almost immediately, just like all love and support. And that felt really, really amazing, especially like instantaneously in real time, from sharing something so personal and so dark, to have that affirmation. And I think now that I'm older, when I first got into activism, I was doing a lot of activism around domestic violence and around violence against women. and marriage equality. And I would try to bring these stories in at different protests, like a Take Back the Night rally and all these other things. And it used to be really hard for me to accept other people hearing my story of domestic violence. I would break out into sweats. I would like shut down. It's kind of hard. And it's with time now, I know that these things happened to me and they shaped me, but I know that I'm larger than that experience. Um, and that's like, it's always that struggle. But I think enough time has passed and enough distance has happened from that pain that it's easier to accept other people hearing my story now.
Yeah, a couple of things on what you just said. One is that it's a piece of who you are, it's not the whole. I think that's really important to acknowledge. And then also, what was the other thing? I had something super profound to say and I lost it.
I hate
Oh,
when
I
that
can't
happens.
remember. I what did you just say? Oh, I had it and I lost it. See, this is what happens if I don't take notes as I go. But I love that you weaved in the thunder and the lightning and that you got that from your mama. So you clearly came by your storytelling talents quite naturally. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right?
Yeah. My mom is a really good storyteller. And part of the reason that I'm like really looking to move to Mexico, my mom used to tell me all these stories about Mexico because her family would go down and visit every summer. But I had never been to Mexico. This week was my second time going to Mexico ever. So I grew up with this like fantastical story land that is this country that was always like really vivid and sometimes gross, and sometimes beautiful. So yeah, my mom's an amazing storyteller.
Yeah, so cool. I love it because you definitely got her skills and are keeping that going. That's what I was going to tell you. Um, about how you were saying that it's hard to share your story when it was closer to you. So when we do our bigger shows, I always tell people that it's okay to share a scar, but it's not okay to share an open wound because an open wound, it's too painful for you, the storyteller, and the audience to hear it because it's just you don't have that distance from it to look back and see that you did make it through, that you were bigger, that it didn't break you, all of the things that you have in perspective. But yeah, I think when it's really an open wound, it's very hard to share and to receive. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like to think about it in my fiction writing as like the trauma bomb.
mm,
It's like I've experienced trauma, so it affects my writing. And to me, it's important to sort of, tell stories around trauma. There's not a lot of them, I think. And I think a lot of them can be kind of problematic, but you don't want a trauma bomb, right?
yeah.
You don't want the open wound. You're not trying to psychologically destabilize your audience.
Yeah.
You're trying to bring them on a journey, and that
Mhm.
journey goes to dark, uncomfortable places, but
Yeah.
comes back out at the end.
Yeah.
But I like the way that you describe it. It's okay to share scars. It's not okay to share open wounds.
Yeah. Well, I do thank you again. And do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we close out? Anything that you remember from that night, or just any thoughts that you've had about injustice? Anything last comment, last chance here?
Yeah, a couple of things if people are curious to know. So, like I think it was 2013, 2014 when we got marriage equality, one
Mm,
of the things that comes with marriage and with the federal government recognizing your relationship are domestic violence protections.
mm,
In a lot of states, the mandatory 12 or 24-hour restraining order, all of those sorts of protections, which LGBT people never had until about 5 or 6 years ago. So people who are in a situation similar to the situation that I was in, who are LGBT, there are more resources, there are more avenues. And if those places block you, then you need to speak up because they're breaking the law.
good.
Um, some of those things there's still some loopholes with housing discrimination because not all states have LGBT housing non-discrimination laws. We just recently won a big one on workplace discrimination, which is huge.
Yes.
But housing and access to healthcare are also incredibly huge.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about sort of like the first immediate thoughts that you have when you hear about housing, when you hear about healthcare, you think like homelessness, you think chronic illness, but domestic violence touches all of those things. Domestic violence is a housing issue, and domestic violence is a healthcare issue. And until everyone has equal access to all of those things, like these problems are going to continue. But I would love for people to know, if you are an LGBT person and you are in a precarious relationship that is getting violent, there are resources. You don't have to experience what I experienced. I fought, I chanted, and I screamed in the streets and in DC, and we finally won it. So reach out, and there is support. There are resources.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So good. So good. We keep fighting. That's
Yep,
the thing. We have to keep fighting. So it's important. And I appreciate people like you and like myself and people that are willing to step into that. It's scary and it's not easy work, but it's crucial to a lot to
exactly.
a lot of people. So I thank you so much, Tihi. You are always welcome at the Long Beach Community Theater. I love when you share. You have become a favorite of mine, and I just adore you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me share my story.
I'm going to stop this.